Summer edition for the win. That's good. I haven't had caffeine for the past few days, so this is my treat. Caffeine. Hello, friends. My name is Miranda. Welcome back to my universe. Today I have my most anticipated read of this year in my hands right now. I'm going to be talking about Stephen King's newest novel, Never Flinch. This was published 2 weeks ago from me recording this. I have a lot to say. If you are wanting something spoiler free, I would direct you to my spoiler free reading vlog where you go on a journey with me as I dive into this book. It is completely spoiler free, so if you are wanting no spoilers, head that way. Otherwise, this video is absolutely crawling with spoilers. I'm going to be giving my in-depth thoughts and reviews on characters, plot lines, plot points, the ending, various aspects like that. So this is everybody's spoiler warning. Very, very spoilery video up ahead, a discussion on things. Let's dive straight on in. So, Never Flinch. What is this novel about? This is a continuation of Holly Gibney's adventures. Holly Gibney is a character that I literally talk about nonstop on my channel, I feel like. She's wonderful. She is a detective. So Stephen King has been writing a lot of detective novels, and this is his newest addition to it. I will be giving you a synopsis just in case there's anybody watching this who hasn't read the book but is still wanting to know what happens, and then I will go over my specific thoughts and feelings after that. Hi, editing Miranda here. I wanted to pop in really quickly and say if you are someone who has read this book already and you do not want a recap over the characters, you don't want a summary over everything that has happened, I included timestamps. So you are able to skip that if you would like to. Those are in the description below. Otherwise, I go over all the things, all the characters. That is there for you if you would like to watch. I'm going to introduce characters because I feel like everything in Stephen King's books are driven greatly by characters, and there's a lot of them to cover. They are also very connected to each of the things and each plot line that is happening in this novel. So the easiest way for me to proceed is to talk about each character specifically. The first person we are introduced to in this novel is a man named Trig. The only thing we find out right away is that he attends AA, which is Alcoholics Anonymous. What we later come to find out is that he is upset over the death of a man in prison who I am forgetting his name. Trig would be very upset at me for that. What ended up happening was a man in prison was murdered, and it was later found out that he was actually innocent. So he was in prison unjustly and wrongly, and Trig's very upset at this, and he believes that all of the jurors and everybody who is in the man's trial is guilty. But he doesn't want to kill them. He ends up writing a letter to the police saying that he will kill 13 innocents and 1 guilty. And so he ends up doing just that. He kills a lot of innocent people. It's very sad and hard to read because most of them are just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Trig, his real identity is Donald Gibson. We also find out that he was juror 9 in the man who was killed in prison in his court case, in his trial. And so he is riddled with guilt. And this is why he feels like everybody else should feel the same. So, pretty twisted man. He also has intense trauma from his father to the point where he ends up adopting this baby voice. He has a lot of psychotic breaks, psychotic episodes where he hears the voice of his father and speaks in the voice of a child because that is how he was when the trauma happened. So a very sad man. Classic example of how you were brought up can greatly affect you later on in life. And yeah, his father was a wicked, evil man, and so he turned Donald into a wicked, evil man. We have 2 antagonists in this novel. Our second antagonist is a man named Christopher Stewart. He has trauma as well. Back when he was 7 years old, he had a twin sister who passed away, and he was the first person to find her body. This completely changed his entire life, and he ends up adopting his sister's identity as well. So he is not only Christopher Stewart, but he is also Chrissy Stewart. We refer to this character by both names. When I first read about this, I thought that he might have DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. However, that is not explicitly stated in this novel, so I don't know if that assumption is correct on my part. However, he has two identities, and it is because of the trauma when he was younger. So, he is our second antagonist. He is hired by a man named Andrew Follows, who is a head over a church. Andrew calls up Christopher and basically says, hey, there is a woman, a pro choicer, who is absolutely evil and a baby killer. You need to kill her. I'm going to task you with killing her. So that's basically that plotline in a nutshell. Chris is on this mission to kill another one of our characters named Kate McKay. Now let's talk about Kate McKay. She is a women's rights activist who is on a multi-state lecture tour. So she is visiting many states in the United States. She is speaking to the masses about her views and her women's rights views, her pro-choice views. She ends up hiring an assistant. She hires Corey Anderson, who is just a young girl. They look very similar. That is how they are described anyway. Corey ends up getting the brunt of many of Chris's attacks. She gets sprayed in the face. She also, at the end of the novel, gets tied up. But we're going to get to the end of the novel later on. On the other side, going back to Trig and his killing spree of innocent people, we meet Izzy Janes. Now, Izzy Janes is also a reoccurring character. She was in Holly by Stephen King as well. I don't know if she's been in other novels, but I mainly know her from Holly. Izzy knows Holly pretty well, and she ends up getting involved in Trig's case. Izzy ends up getting wrapped up in this game of baseball, which I have thoughts about that. I have many thoughts because the game itself, it's this game, this huge game that is like apparently this big deal, and it's the cops versus the firemen, which is just a disaster waiting to happen, right? Because who is going to respond to emergencies? I seriously think that this event, because it happens at the end of the novel where everything else is happening, right? I think that Stephen King mainly just needed the cops and the firemen out of the way so that Holly could shine. Because really that event doesn't play any other role and really is a bit pointless otherwise. So, yeah. Anyway, so Izzy ends up getting really wrapped up in this game and it pulls her away from the case, which is very unfortunate. So then Holly Gibney steps in for that and does her own detective work. She still is a business owner, so she is the owner of Finders Keepers, which is a detective agency, and so she still runs that. She does not get involved like crazy because she really can't. She's not a police officer. However, she does her own research. She ends up being greatly involved in both Trig's case and Christopher Stewart's case. So she's involved with everything almost all of the time. She also ends up being hired as well by Kate and Corey, the women's rights activists, and her assistant. They end up hiring Holly as their security guard, bodyguard, basically. So Holly ends up in their little circle as well. So lots of things connecting here. I'm almost done with characters, don't worry. We only have two others that I really want to go over, and that is the siblings, Barbara Robinson and her brother, Jerome. They are also involved in a few of the things happening in this novel as well. They end up becoming a humongous part of the ending of this novel. Oh, I forgot to mention another character. You see what I mean? When I said in my vlog that there are so many characters, it is kind of hard to keep track of them. Yeah, another main character is named Sister Bessie. Sista Bessie. She is a gospel singer. She ends up coming out of retirement to perform, and she's actually going to sing at this major baseball game that Izzy and the cops, the policemen, the firefighters are all a part of. If you've read the previous novel, you know that Barbara Robinson, one of the siblings, she is a poet. Actually, both of them are writers. Jerome also is a published author. So, but Barbara writes poetry, and Sista Bessie loves her poetry and ends up getting in contact with her and asking if she could make a song of one of her poems. So that's how Barbara kind of gets wrapped into it. Jerome always tends to just be standing on the sidelines, but he becomes a major part at the end because Barbara is also one of the women that end up tied up, and he comes to her rescue right away. All right, so now that we know basically a gist of what's happening and what goes on, I'm going to specifically talk about the endings. At the very end of this novel, there is quite a few things that happen, so I apologize in advance if I forget some things. But Trig and Chris end up in the same exact place at the same time. Trig ends up tying up multiple women. He grabs Barbara, Kate, Corey. He makes this whole plan that he's going to drag Sister Bessie over to where he's at and kill her, then kill the people that he tied up, and then kill himself. While this is happening, Chris is hiding in the shadows. Okay, they're in this abandoned building. It's like an abandoned ballpark or abandoned stadium, something like that. He made his way in there as well without even knowing that Trig was there and all of this other crap was happening, right? He was there to seek refuge since people were starting to catch on to his identity and that he is wanting to kill Kate. So he sought refuge out in an abandoned building, is just minding his own business, honestly, until he finds out that they are tied up by Trig. And so he's like, wow, this made it easy for me. Trig is going crazy. He starts this fire to burn the entire place down with him inside or whatever. Him and Chris get into it when Chris realizes that, oh my gosh, Trig is going to take away my opportunity to bring justice, to end Kate's life. So they get into it. Chris ends up winning. And then when Sister Bessie is on her way over, Jerome catches up, and Holly also is there too. They all know from various reasons, from various people, what is happening. All three of them are there now. And Holly and Jerome are the ones that stand face to face with Christopher. They end up killing him, but at this point, it is an extremely dangerous environment because Trig had started a fire. So they are desperately trying to get everybody out, everybody safe. They end up getting people out and safe, but the building burns down. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much how it ends. Now that we actually have like all of the major plot points, everything covered, I want to talk about my feelings about things. I overall really enjoyed this novel. I liked every single character we met. The only one that I thought was very interesting and weird, and I just didn't like, is obviously our antagonists, and that's purposeful, right? But specifically, Chris. I had a major issue with the fact that he was hired by a church. And if you watched my vlog, I actually explain quite a lot of my thoughts and feelings at the end of that video. The main reason that I have an issue with this is because it is enforcing a stereotype. When pro-choice and pro-life, when those movements were a big deal, which I mean, they still are a thing, right? I'm not discounting them. When they came to a head and it was a huge thing all over social media, it was all people could talk about. There was a stereotype that all Christians, Catholics, religious people were pro-life and were vehemently against pro-choicers. Stephen King, by making an assassin work for a church, was feeding into the stereotype against religious people, against Christians, right? Against pro-lifers in general. That was my big issue, was that Chris was so involved in the church, but also he so misunderstood the gospel and misunderstands who God is. That was my major issue with this novel overall. I still gave this book 5 stars. Besides that, I found all of the characters to be extremely intriguing. I enjoyed that our antagonists, that Chrissy Stewart, and Trig, Donald Gibson, I loved how complex they were in their past, in their trauma. They were for sure acting a certain way because of what they have endured in their past. So my psychology brain really, really enjoyed that Stephen King explored all those dark avenues. He does a fantastic job with writing his characters so that the reader reads it And oh my gosh, they see exactly what is happening in his characters' brains. Here's Christopher carrying so much trauma from his past with his sister and with almost rejection from his father. And then we have Trig, who grew up with an abusive father. His father still haunts him, still follows Trig around, is still telling him to do things in his mind. So we have all of these things. And I mean, we see a very little aspect of this even in our main character, Holly, because Holly has her mother who loved her so much and so dearly, but lost sight of what love really means. And so had a very twisted sense of love. And Holly's mom ended up pushing Holly away, even though she wasn't trying to. And so Holly, as she grows up and as an adult, she has this trauma that she's carrying, has these really heavy things and grief that she is still working through. They're real. His characters are so real. And I appreciate that so much from King. It is one of my favorite things about all of his books in general. None of his characters are shallow. On a little bit of a lighter note, I really enjoyed the dynamics between Kate and her assistant Corey and Holly. I think Stephen King did a great job exploring what fame can do to you, because he talks several times about Kate and how egotistical she has become because of how popular she is. So all of his characters have faults. It's not just our antagonists, it's our protagonists as well. Their dynamics were very interesting. Just what can happen when you work closely with someone who has an underlying belief. Oh my gosh. Sorry, my throat was so dry there for a second. But what happens when you work for someone who has an underlying belief that they are better than you because they're more famous than you, because they're more popular than you, because they have more money than you, etc., right? They're just a little bit twisted sisterhood in a way was very fun to read about. And at the end of the day, they were there together in that horrific moment. They were together, and Holly ended up saving them. She did her job, right? As their security guard, as their bodyguard, she ended up saving them. So it all just ends up resolving so well. But seeing how their relationship ends up ebbing and flowing and just the different turns that it takes was very interesting. I also really like Izzy. A secret part of me really hopes and wishes that Stephen King will write a book specifically about Izzy. However, I know that several people, I mean, myself included, I am getting a little bit tired of his detective novels, and I wish that he would write horror again. But nonetheless, I have been loving his detective novels as well. So if he produces another one, I am really hoping and praying that Izzy becomes a main character, because she was a main character, of course, but she was wrapped up in the baseball game for most of this novel. I really liked seeing her relationship with Holly, their business relationship, but also their personal relationship as friends. What I also loved is that this book starts and ends with them eating lunch at the same exact place both times. So it was just cool to have that wrapped up in a little bow, just them hanging out eating at the beginning before any of this craziness happened, and then after, when Izzy has a broken shoulder from the baseball game. Just a lot of strings that were left loose for a while, and then they end up all tying together at the end. There were even side characters that Stephen King introduced that played a pivotal role. He left no character unnoticed. Everyone he brought up was intentional. A lot of like little tiny things happening in the shadows that all end up working out in the end. I think the ending happened really fast, but I will admit, I love that his ending ended with fire, because the whole building was caught on fire by Trig. If you've read Stephen King, you are aware that most of his novels end with either fire or water. That is a symbol of purification, and which was Trig's whole point, because he had been in that building with his father growing up. So he was like, I need to burn this place down so that my father dies with it. I loved the ending. I loved the characters. All of it. The storytelling was fantastic. Please, if you have read this novel, comment down below your thoughts and feelings, your favorite parts, what you really enjoyed, your favorite characters. Tell me all the good stuff. I would love to hear your take on Stephen King's newest novel. As always, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you have not already for more Stephen King content. And of course, as always, I love you all so, so much. Please be safe, make amazing choices, and I definitely will be seeing you next time. Bye!